Hey everyone, and thank you so much for clicking on this video. My name is Justin, and today the Toronto Maple Leafs open up their 2022-2023 campaign against the Montreal Canadiens. It's the start of the NHL season for the Leafs. I cannot wait. I'm so excited. So today we're going through a little bit of a preview of what to expect for this season. Now, last year, I said over and over that I wasn't setting expectations for the Leafs. I didn't want to think of anything that they could or should do throughout the regular season, throughout the playoffs, because at that point, we were coming off of just a devastating loss to the Montreal Canadiens in round one the year before, and I was just really down on the team, and I was thinking, regular season doesn't mean anything anymore. It's only about the playoffs. I don't care when they win. I don't care when they lose. I just want them to perform well enough to get to the playoffs, and then in the playoffs, prove that they can do something a little bit more special. Well, that was pretty short-lived. Now, the Leafs went on a terrible stretch to start last season, losing majority of games. I think they started like 3-7-0, something like that, but then went on a tear for the rest of the year. And what an exciting season it was. You couldn't help but just get caught up with how much fun this team was having, how good this team was, some of the performances from some of the players on this team. It was a really, really fun team to watch, a really fun season. And then in the playoffs, the time that I figured that was, the only thing that mattered. Well, they still didn't get it done, but they proved to me, and I think they proved to many, many others, that this team is a little bit different from the teams that we've seen in the past in the playoffs. This team is ready to take a next step. They did take that next step. It looks like they had defeated all those demons in their minds that they weren't good enough. They played their hearts out and got beat by the Tampa Bay Lightning. And that is justifiable. And so this season, we're coming in with a little bit of a different attitude. It's very high for me. Not saying that the expectations should be incredibly high, but more so the feeling of positivity and optimism. That's the big one. This team has the potential to do something extremely special. Now, should we bank on it? No, they have no track record of success in the playoffs, but there is no reason to doubt this team's ability and no reason to trash them this early on. Like, let's watch them, let's support them, let's see what they can do. Because again, last year, I went into the season with terrible expectations or no expectations, and they played so well and I couldn't help but get hooked. So let's just give them the benefit of the doubt off the start this year, and we'll see what they can do. And in my opinion, this year's roster is an even better roster than last season's. And last season's was a better roster than the year before. They've, year over year, clearly gotten better. And that's shown in the records, that's shown in the individual performances. But this team is once again taking another step. For me, what that is the bottom six looks deadly. And that's not necessarily scoring potential, but it's more so role players, lines that have specific objectives that I think are better able to support the top two lines than we've had in the past. In the years before, we've had some third lines that they didn't really have an identity. Are they a forechecking line? Are they a defensive line? Are they supposed to be some depth scoring? The fourth line, well, we've historically had some, tougher, older guys with like Clifford and Simmons, or more veteran leadership like Spezza or Thornton. But that fourth line rarely played any ice time. And when they did, they were kind of just, killing time. This year, the Leafs' third and fourth lines are clear in what they should be. Both lines are absolutely relentless forecheckers. You've got a line with Zach Aston-Reese, Aube-Kubel, and Kampf that is going to be an incredible shutdown line. And what I think they're planning to do is use that line in very defensive starts. So like defensive zone faceoffs or matching up against the other team's top lines. And that will open up so much more opportunity for both the Matthews and the Tavares lines to really play a little bit more offensively. We know that they've got the talent in them. We know that they've shown it in the past, but this allows Sheldon Keefe to deploy them in an even more offensive manner, more offensive minutes, more offensive opportunities, more opportunity to maybe cheat a little bit for offense because you've got the bottom six to support on the defensive end. And that's really exciting. Younger players too, like Aube-Kubel, Zach Aston-Reese, even David Kampf. These are younger guys. We're not relying on people at the end of their career to have a resurgence in their performance, bringing it back like 5 years in the past. No, we're expecting people to be growing, still developing, looking to get into the prime of their career and establish themselves as full-time NHLers, which I think that they have. But that's a very, very solid fourth line. And then you look at the third line when fully healthy, that's Kerfoot and Järnkrok and Pierre Engvall. Pierre Engvall I hated 2 years ago. I will not sugarcoat it. I did not like Pierre Engvall. I thought he was useless. And last year really blew me away. He really did. He's still not the most offensive, and I think he's got that ability, but, you know, he calls for the pass and then turns it over quite quickly. But his ability to forecheck, his ability to play defense, his ability on the penalty kill to provide some offense, he showed that with Ilya Mikheyev, who we lost, but maybe he can take over that role a little bit. He's shown speed. He is absolutely ripped, and I think he's 6'5". He's got the ability to play physical. And then you pair that with Kerfoot and Järnkrok, who are two very, very similar players because they're Swiss Army knives, right? They can do whatever you need on any given night. Same thing with Pierre Engvall, actually. That whole third line, if you need a little bit more offense and you need your third line to contribute a goal, they're there to do that. If you need your third line to match up against their top line for some defensive stops, they can do that. Kerfoot, Järnkrok, and Engvall are all penalty killers. They can do it. They can do whatever you need. And again, what does that allow? It allows the Matthews line and the Tavares line to focus on scoring goals. And that's what they need to do most throughout the regular season, and especially come the playoffs. I know we're way ahead of ourselves thinking of the playoffs here, but in the playoffs, the Leafs have struggled to score. That is the biggest thing. And I think that with this team, the way they're constructed, they are set up to score the most goals that they've been able to do that in the past. Now, there are a couple storylines starting on the offensive end here coming out of camp. Well, Nick Robertson was sent down and will not start the season with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And instead, Dennis Mulligan got that spot. And people are pretty up in arms in that. And I can understand why, because Nick Robertson put on a show in the preseason. But so did Dennis Mulligan. And I think people are just blindly looking at, you know, this is a prospect that's been having difficulties in establishing a full-time role in the NHL so far. So people are itching at getting him into the roster. But I think he had the exact same amount of points as Dennis Mulligan, except for the fact that Dennis Mulligan has 200 games in the NHL playing for the Florida Panthers prior to that trade with the Leafs for Mason Marchment. And then he went over to the Swiss League for probably 3 or 4 years, tore it up. He was one of the leading scorers every single year he was there. And now he's coming back as an even better, more developed player, ready to jump into your top 6 without any doubt. And he deserves that spot regardless of the whole contract situation. And then you look at the contracts, and Dennis Mulligan would require waivers if you were to try to send him down. He would get claimed. 100% he would get claimed. Nick Robertson still has room to develop, can still use a little bit more time in the minors. I think could step into the NHL roster with what he showed in the preseason, but he does not require waivers. And that's just the unfortunate reality of the situation. But for management, that if they were to place Mulligan on waivers just to call up Nick Robertson, start him in the league, and then it doesn't work out, and then they have to send him down eventually, it would have been an absolutely brutal use of assets in their league. They need to be smart with these decisions, and they absolutely were. I'm sorry for Nick Robertson. I hope they explain this to him well behind closed doors. I'm sure he understands. And I think within a few days, he's going to be on the Leafs roster because he can be an emergency call-up. And in that whole situation with Nick Robertson going down, the amount of salary cap space that the Leafs were over the salary cap was almost the exact equivalent to the dollar of Nick Robertson's. So if Nick Robertson got sent down, which they did, now the Leafs are only $4 under the salary cap, which people might, look at that and say, wow, bad management because you only have $4 in cap space. What's that going to get you? What the reality is if you're looking at long-term injury reserve, so if a player is out for an extended period of time, I think it's 25 calendar days or 10 NHL games that they would have to miss to go onto LTIR, like the likes of Timothy Liljegren is on right now. Well, what it does is it doesn't, minimize your cap space. It doesn't remove that from the cap, but it does add to the cap. And the way it works is it's added to the amount that you start the season with. So the closer you are to the salary cap, the more flexibility you have throughout the regular season. And most teams, when they do it successfully, end up within a few $100,000 of the salary cap to start the season. The Leafs ended up $4 off. That is the most flexibility that any team could possibly get with long-term injury reserve, which is something that every team will absolutely use throughout the season. Players get hurt. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. When we put people on long-term injury reserve, the amount of flexibility that we will have will be incredible. The one concern is the roster spots. We're at 50 of 50, so I think there would be some moves coming where we have to exchange a player for a pick or a prospect or someone that's not on an NHL contract, just to make sure that we have a little bit more flexibility in that regard. But this was an absolute masterclass by Kyle Dubas and Brandon Pridham. Good for them. I hope they get some attention and some credit from some people because they've been doing an incredible job here. The roster looks great, and the amount of cap space we have is just perfect. Now, looking at the defensive end, well, it's pretty much the exact same as last year, except the biggest acquisition we had on it, which came at the deadline, and Mark Giordano, is starting the season on the Leafs, which I know he's 39 years old. I get it. He's old, and we shouldn't be talking about him this much, but he's proven he can still play very good hockey. He proved that when he was paired up with Timothy Liljegren, and Liljegren seemed to have exploded onto the scene, taking that massive step, showing that he is a full-time NHLer playing beside him. And then even in the preseason this year, Giordano has been racking up the points. I think it's not even being talked about very much, but he was playing some incredible hockey. And now he's paired up with Rasmus Sandin, if I'm not mistaken. So will that help Rasmus Sandin in his development, help him take that next step and really establish himself as a full-time NHLer? I think it will, and that's a really, really good third defensive pairing. You've got Riley and Brody as the first. You know that they work together. They've done it so long in the past. The one thing that we're looking at right now is Muzzin and Hall. How are they going to perform? Well, a couple of years ago, they were very, very effective together, being a true shutdown defensive pairing. Justin Hall was very young in his career at the time, and it seemed like he was going to be a very good pick. But now, last year, Justin Hall, clear liability. Jake Muzzin, a couple concussions and some injuries, just you don't know where he was at. And that group, the two of them just did not look good whatsoever together last year. So what will they look like this year? I personally think they're going to be more like the duo from 2 years ago than they were last year. I think Justin Hall's actually looked pretty solid in the preseason. I think it's not considered enough that year over year, you know, having an off season to reset the mind, to work on some things, to come in as a fresh start for a new season, that can really, really be therapeutic for a lot of players. And I think that will be the case for Justin Hall. He knows he wasn't the player he should have been last season. He knows that the Leafs desperately need him because we need a right-handed defenseman, especially at his contract number. We need a solid defensive group for the penalty kill. We know that he needs a role on this team, and I think he knows it too. And he's going to come into the season and really take another step. Now, is he going to be an all-star? No, but he's going to be effective. At least that's my prediction and my hope. And Jake Muzzin, we'll see where that goes. Is he a candidate to be traded at some point this season? Potentially. Can he bounce back and play, you know, healthy minutes and prove that he's one of the best two-way defensemen on the Leafs? It's possible. We're just going to have to wait and see. Regardless, you know, lines 1 through 3 on the defensive end, it's a deep defensive group. And a lot of people think that the Leafs struggle defensively. I have no concerns in that regard whatsoever. I think this group is looking really good as a 6. And lastly, it's the goaltending. I've touched on this a lot in the past, but I really am hopeful and optimistic and feeling good about this group. Last year, it's been talked about a lot. The Leafs had the 27th best goaltending save percentage, I'm pretty sure, last year. That's awful. And still they came 4th in the NHL. They don't need stellar goaltending. Would it help? Obviously. You want, you know, the Vasilevskis and the Shesterkins and the Ottingers. Of course you do. But what you really need is average goaltending, league average. If you can hover somewhere around 9-10 save percentage, I think the Leafs are absolutely laughing the way to the top of the Atlantic. I really do. So Can Murray and Samsonov provide that? Well, in the preseason, they've showed very well. It's not the regular season. We'll have to see how it actually goes. But I've got a lot of faith in the two of them. You've got one in Matt Murray that's looking to have a resurgence in his career. He's shown that he's capable in the past. He's shown that potentially his new surroundings in Toronto can be exactly what he's needed after a terrible stint in Ottawa. He's shown that he's had injury problems in the past, and he's had some mental health problems in the past because of his father passing. Well, maybe that's something that he's had in the past as well, and that he's gotten over, that might be allowing him to take that next step in his career again. And Ilya Samsonov is a goalie that I was even shocked that he was available on the free agent market. And he decided to take a one-year deal at less money with Toronto because he sees an opportunity here to really establish himself in this league, which he's fully capable of doing. If I'm not mistaken, he's a first-round draft pick, and he's still very young, younger than Eric Källgren. Speaking of Källgren, if either of those goalies go down, I have no reservations about our third goalie. A few years ago, when we would have a goalie injury and Michael Hutchinson was in the net, oh boy, I was really, really concerned. Every single time he was in the net, I was concerned. This year, if either of our goalies go down, Källgren comes in, it's not the ideal situation, but I'm not concerned. I'm really not. He showed that he can win games last year. So as a 2 and as a 3, I don't think we have any concerns. It's obviously a topic of conversation. Obviously, people look at the numbers and they think that it's not good enough. But let's wait and see. I really do think that they can surprise some people this year. And again, there's a really, really good team in front of them. They can pick each other up, and I'm confident they will, and we'll see what happens from there. In all, this Leafs team is so good, and I cannot wait to watch this season. Matthews, perennial goal scorer. How many is he going to put up? How many points is Marner going to get? I think William Nylander can be sneaky, knocking on the door of 90 points this year. He's already talked about the tinted visor as well because he had migraines in the past. I didn't know about that. If he was having migraines and putting up the numbers he was having, what can he do without those? John Tavares supposedly had a down season last year and still put up a point per game. If he can go back to where people think he can be, we've got 2 lines of 90-point players. I mean, that's just incredible. The defensive depth that we have this year is better than we've had in years past. We've got a tandem that's ready to compete with each other. We've got a really good team. And I think that the Leafs could be pushing the top of the Atlantic and even the President's Trophy. We'll see. That's not my expectation, but we'll see. My expectation, though, is that this team is going to be a lot of fun to watch. And I think that every doubter, every Leafs hater is going to watch this team. And I don't think there's going to be any doubt about it. You're going to have to admit, at the very least, it's fun. That's the whole point. This is entertainment, right? It's a sport. They're going to be fun to watch, and I can't wait for it to get started tonight. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy the game tonight, and I'll see you in the next video.